Here we are at lawhub.lsac.org, and to begin any of these drill sets, you're going to need to go to LSAT Prep. You're going to get off of the Full Tests tab and go to Drill Sets. And to start this explanation video, we're going to need to scroll down past all of the logical reasoning to Drill Set 6, and we're going to click New Drill Set. It will take a moment to load, but as soon as you get here, you'll see that there's an elapsed timer. We are going to just turn that off. I probably do recommend just turning it off for the purposes of these drill sets because you're not going to have any set duration for almost like half of a section. And now we're going to click Go to Questions. And as always, we're going to engage the passage first, irrespective of the question, to get an overall main idea understanding of the content. But do recognize that in the drill sets, unlike the actual prep tests, you won't have the ability to go to a passage only view. So we're going to just have to mentally ignore what's on the right hand side, knowing we've got to read each paragraph individually, stop after reading the full paragraph, and then highlight the one and possibly two sentences that capture the overall main idea of that paragraph so that you can build an overall coherent narrative solely by highlighting those main idea sentences. So we'll read the paragraph at left from the top. There are two especially influential interpretations of 19th century British feminists' opposition to efforts to restrict women's hours of work, that of liberal legal historians on the one hand and that of labor historians on the other. For legal historians, the 19th century was an age of collectivism in which an emphasis on welfare replaced the emphasis on individual rights, and the state came to be seen as a protector of its inhabitants rather than as a referee among citizens. Women and children were the first beneficiaries of maximum hours restrictions that would eventually spread to men as well. British feminists, according to these scholars, could not afford to seem to favor these special laws for women because their single-minded campaign for women's suffrage relied so heavily on arguments derived from 18th century theories of individual rights and equality. Most labor historians, on the other hand, explain the feminist opposition to protective laws as coming from middle-class women who blindly ignored the injustices against which such laws' supporters struggled continuously. Labor historians attack the feminists for having a selfish ideology, one that asked that privileged women be allowed to enjoy equal treatment with privileged men, but not that the economic basis of social relations be rethought. So, there's a lot in this paragraph, and we're actually going to stay very high level, and we're going to select a highlighting color, and we're just going to highlight this opening sentence because we are told there are two especially influential interpretations of 19th century British feminist opposition to efforts to restrict women's hours of work, that of liberal legal historians on the one hand and that of labor historians on the other, and everything else is really just expanding upon this opening sentence from the paragraph. We don't want to overemphasize any one aspect of that relatively dense prose. We just know that we're going to get the two interpretation of 19th century British feminist opposition to efforts to restrict women's work hours. And they come from liberal legal historians and labor historians. That's it. Now we're going to scroll on down to the middle paragraph and pick up at the top. Recently, however, feminist historians have begun to uncover plentiful reasons for feminist mistrust of government and trade union efforts to protect women. Their studies of women's trade unions reveal, as the earlier histories did not, the tensions between women and men within the trade union movement. They document that male-dominated trade unions often supported and sometimes even sponsored protective labor legislation aimed at forcibly excluding women from wage labor, either in order to maintain a husband's right to his wife's unpaid labor in the home or to preserve jobs for men. Such gender conflicts were complicated, as other feminist scholars have demonstrated, by self-interested government policies that alternately enticed women into jobs in order to end labor shortages or push them out to provide jobs for men. Finally, the studies show that state labor policy toward women was always deeply influenced by a desire to control female morality and to influence childbearing decisions. So, similar to the structure of the first paragraph, we get a new position from feminist historians, and we want to highlight this topic sentence as well. And we, again, probably don't want to highlight anything else to avoid overemphasizing something preemptively, not knowing what the questions are going to be focused on. But here we're going to get the position of feminist historians as opposed to what we had up top, which was interpretations from liberal legal historians and labor historians. So we've got a lot of opinions of historians on this idea of women and laws restricting their hours in the workplace. So we'll just continue on to the final paragraph. Whether protective labor legislation for women is just or expedient is still in dispute today, and legal scholars disagree on what criteria to use to evaluate such laws. The labor historians' class-based analyses are no more fully adequate than the liberal legal historians' benign evolutionary depictions. Feminist historians have a major contribution to make to both the reconstruction of the historical record dealing with women and labor legislation and to broader theories of law as an instrument of social control and of social change. So this time, we've only got a 3-sentence final paragraph, and we're talking about the 3 populations of historians. And we should recall we can largely highlight up to 2 sentences in any individual paragraph. So I would recommend highlighting the final 2 sentences because they talk about the author's position on the positions of all 3 of these different types of historians. So we'll read through the highlights just to confirm an overall coherent narrative before we address any question. So from the top, there are 2 especially influential interpretations of 19th century British feminists' opposition to efforts to restrict women's hours of work, that of liberal legal historians on the one hand, and that of labor historians on the other. Recently, however, feminist historians have begun to uncover plentiful reasons for feminist mistrust of government and trade union efforts to protect women. The labor historians' class-based analyses are no more fully adequate than the liberal legal historians' benign evolutionary depictions. Feminist historians have a major contribution to make to both the reconstruction of the historical record dealing with women and labor legislation and to broader theories of law as an instrument of social control and of social change. I'm leaving out a lot of the details, and that's intentional. We're going to have to reread for any questions asking about a detail, such as question 1 here that we'll be addressing in a moment. Thank you for watching this MyGuru LSAT Reading Comprehension problem explanation video. If you enjoyed the tips that it contains, please consider subscribing to the channel or becoming a member for early and exclusive access to additional practice problem explanation videos using official problems over at lawhub.lsac.org. But for now, let's get back to this explanation. Now and only now are we going to go to address question 1's question stem, and we actually do have a specific term to refer to that we really just ignored up to this point. Number 1 reads, it can be inferred from the passage that the age of collectivism, second sentence of the first paragraph, the author means a period in which, so we don't have to highlight what's already highlighted, we're just going to highlight age of collectivism means a period in which something happens. So we'll scroll back up here and we can select a different highlight color if necessary to focus on what the age of collectivism means. And we can reread just for this term. For legal historians, the 19th century was an age of collectivism in which an emphasis on welfare replaced the emphasis on individual rights, and the state came to be seen as a protector of its inhabitants rather than as a referee among citizens. And we really should just focus on what is highlighted in orange as we evaluate the answer choices. So starting with choice A. Coalitions among various social classes began to be established in order to promote common legislative goals. There are no legislative goals referenced in that orange highlight, so goodbye to choice A. Next, choice B, legislators began to treat workers as members of a social class rather than as individuals when drafting labor legislation. Again, we're not drafting labor legislation in that orange highlight. That is the reference that we need to refer back to, so goodbye to choice B. Then Choice C, the competing interests of the various social classes were commonly harmonized by subordinating them to the needs of the state. Subordinating them to the needs of the state? Absolutely not. Apparently, the state is helping out is protecting the students, not or the subjects, not subordinating them. So goodbye to choice C is again being something that is exceedingly extreme. Then choice D, only needs and goals common to all classes in society became part of a society's legislative agenda. All classes, legislative agenda, extreme, need additional information. Goodbye to D. And then lastly, choice E, the state's role as active promoter of social welfare, well, that seems pretty good, took precedence over its role as guarantor of individual liberties. Ding, ding, ding. That is our correct answer for choice E. And you can see we still have to engage with an upfront read, even when we're being tasked with a specific term location referent first question, as was the case with the first question of the first passage of Reading Comprehension Drill Set number 6 over at lawhub.lsac.org.